and economies of scale for organisations of all types. The arguments are well understood, especially for public cloud services. New servers can be brought on stream instantaneously, infrastructure scaled almost infinitely, and new features tested without the overhead of new equipment purchase. But one aspect of cloud that tends to get overlooked is the data itself. First, some cloud providers use proprietary formats, meaning that data can't easily be moved to an alternative provider. Second, the volumes of data involved in such a move may be very considerable, making high bandwidth connectivity essential if downtime is to be reduced. And then, of course, there's the perennial issues around data, sovereignty, stewardship, data protection laws, and others like that. All of these factors tend to mitigate against moving to a new provider, even if prices or service might be better elsewhere. But data portability is becoming an important consideration. If your cloud provider cannot meet your expectations, or worse, if it goes bust, you need to be able to move your data quickly, easily, and with an absolute minimum of downtime. You certainly don't want to be locked into an inadequate or failing supplier. Data portability is an especially vital consideration when we think about hybrid cloud, in which we're bringing more platforms into the overall mix. More and more organizations are seeking to mix and match their cloud environments using low-cost, hyperscale public cloud services for mass storage and bulk processing, and custom or private clouds for sensitive data or where fine-grained control is necessary. Once again, you don't want to move your data into a public cloud or onto a specialized storage device only to find it's incompatible with the other platforms in your chosen setup. And data sovereignty and security stipulations may mean that while you'd want to use cloud processing for maximum scale out at minimum cost, storing data within a public cloud infrastructure outside of your own country could put you on the wrong side of the law. Well, my name's Stuart Sumner, I'm the editor of Computing, and with me to discuss these important issues today are, first of all, Martin Warren, who's the Cloud Solutions Marketing Manager from EMEA at NetApp. Next to Martin, we have Mark Scaife, Head of Technical Development at Phoenix. And finally, we have Computing's Senior Reporter, Suraj Shah. Now, before we kick off, just a few points of housekeeping. You can see, hopefully, us on your screens in front of you. We have a couple of polls, interactive polls, which I'll be opening up today, so please do take part in those. And we've got a couple of slides, just a few slides from our research, which will be appearing on your screens automatically. There's just two buttons on the bottom of your screens I want to draw attention to. One is the questions button, which surprisingly enables you to ask your questions here to us in the studio. Please do get your questions in as early as possible. They come through to me here and I'll ask them to our panel. What sometimes happens is I get a sudden flood of questions with 5 minutes to go, and of course then I have no time to ask any of them. So please do get your questions in as early as possible. We do love to have them. The other button is biographies, which is fairly self-explanatory. So, back to the topic. We're talking about the challenge of managing data across a multi-vendor, multi-platform landscape. Ensuring data can be moved where it needs to go, maintaining visibility and control without increasing complexity. So those are the sort of issues in a nutshell. We do have experts with us today, so we don't need to listen to me rabbiting on. Martin, could you sort of expand on some of the issues I've mentioned so far and tell us what we're really going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so I think your summary is a really, really good one. It covers all the key points. What we've found is that many of our customers and organisations we speak with have they've dipped their toe in the water with private cloud. That's worked very well for them. And what they're now sort of moving more towards is this hybrid cloud idea, you know, the fact that they want to get some of the benefits of public cloud, and get to some of the cost economics of that and the agility that offers. The challenge really is around the data, as you set out in the introduction, and it's the fact that, you know, in public cloud you don't own the network, you don't own the compute, you don't own the storage. What you do own is the data itself. It's your responsibility. It doesn't matter where it's stored, it still remains your responsibility, and it could remain, you know, in ownership for tens of years. So it has a lot of issues around that. The other thing with data is it doesn't move easy. Because if you think about it, compute is, you can turn it on and off, you can do an end-of-year audit, you know, and spin up 100 servers, but then you can turn them off again at the end of it. At the end of that, of course, you've still got the data. So that data needs another consideration. So it's not easy to move. It's got weight, it's got physical mass. You know, it's something that sits on some physical device. So moving it between different clouds is an issue. And I think really where we want to get to is put the customer at the center and say, look, what is it from the cloud that you want to use? You know, how much private cloud balanced against public cloud? What is that mix? Do you want to use some of the big hyperscale providers in that that mix as well. And what we aim to do is allow you to move the data from the private cloud into the public cloud, and from public cloud to a hyperscale, and vice versa. And also, maybe you don't want the data in the cloud, you want it next to the cloud, so that there's solutions around that. So really it's putting customer first, allowing the customer to get to the goodies of the cloud, at the same time remain in control of that data.
Fantastic. Thanks, Martin. Lots to think about there, lots to talk about. We'll be coming on to a lot of those issues very shortly. Before we do, though, I just want to open up the first poll of the day. So this will be appearing on your screens very shortly. It's multiple choice, and the question is, what type of cloud services are you running? As you can see, lots of various options there for you to choose. The answers are private cloud, which could be hosted or on premises, public software as a service like Office 365, Salesforce, Google Docs, others are available. Public infrastructure as a service like Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, IBM SoftLayer, familiar names there all. Public platform as a service like IBM Bluemix, Red Hat OpenShift, OpenStack, or hybrid cloud, which is a mix of public and private, or indeed none at all. Those are your options. I'll be closing that poll in about the next 15 minutes or so, so please do get answering, and we'll have a look at the results later. Okay, so we've spoken quite a bit about data portability so far, so let's talk now about some of the factors that prevent us moving our data where we might like to. And we'll come to you first, Mark. One of the issues that we've been talking about earlier in our conversation before the webinar was about specific data formats. This issue that you might have you might be using one cloud provider, you might want to move your data to another, but your data by that cloud provider is stored in a specific format which is perhaps incompatible elsewhere. So can you explain a bit about those issues and how you might get around them?
Yeah, so I guess as we move more into the public space and people are wanting to consume more public cloud, what you're tending to find is businesses that have got virtual workloads on a particular hypervisor type. So for example, if you're on a Hyper-V environment, it's relatively easy for you to move your data up into Azure. But it's not as easy for you to move it to AWS or to vCloud Air, etc., because the underlying disks are not compatible. And at this stage right now, the big cloud providers are only just understanding this problem and coming up with solutions that enable you to migrate from one particular disk type over to the public cloud vendor's choice of disk, in essence. And you're seeing spin-off services from this as well. So you've got smaller companies such as Eucalyptus, for example, that are enabling you to pull data back from public cloud and hold it in an Amazon-type format in your private data center. So I think it's a market that's just opening up, and people are suddenly realizing, oh, there's an opportunity and we need to address this problem, because it is a limiting factor in terms of where a business puts their data in a public cloud.
Sure, thanks for that. I'd like to go on to talk about APIs, and helpfully we've already had a question from the audience which asks exactly that. So I'm going to put this question to you first, Martin.
Yep.
The question is, so can you really expect big proprietary cloud firms to open up their APIs? After all, that won't affect their USP and competitiveness. Sorry, the question is, after all, won't that affect their USP and competitiveness? So this issue of lack of APIs, and is that ever going to change?
I think what you're going to see is those big cloud providers will realise that there's extra money to be made, and there's some of the issues that we've discussed need to be addressed. So those APIs will become available, and we as a company are already working with some of those providers. We also we started very early with the OpenStack forum. We were founder members of that. So we're putting our APIs into the open forum, into the open market for other vendors, even some of our competitors to lock into. So I think you're going to see a much more collaborative vision for the future. There's room for everyone in this market. It's really just a case of working out where the data is best stored and where that compute is best done.
So that's something that will change in future. So
I believe it will, yes.
And I think as well, if you think about it, it's quite a lucrative market at the moment. Cloud's the buzzword. Since it came out in say 2012, it's now become mainstream, and businesses are now, as well as putting test and dev into public cloud, they're now looking at moving their infrastructure, their back office function into public cloud. The trust is starting to get there. So while the big public providers are enjoying healthy revenue and margin at the moment, that won't last forever, and then they will look to how to be more inclusive to capture more of the market. So like you just says, open API framework is absolutely essential. So I think API in general, it's just getting there now with cloud providers in terms of how you do that hybrid approach from private to public. But the APIs are still very specific for the workload. So VMware's got its own APIs for vCloud Air, Hyper-V's got the same for Azure, etc., etc. But you'll see, and I guess OpenStack is driving this into enterprise, that you'll start to see this open API and more agnostic standpoint in terms of cloud offerings, and there'll be tools and vendors such as NetApp helping customers get from A to B through an open framework where you can basically, it's up to you as the consumer or the customer to choose where your workloads reside.
So this is a situation that's already improving.
Yeah,
oh
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I know we'll probably get to it later, but our vision is around this data fabric, this idea that you've got that interconnectivity, you've got APIs between different vendors, between different service providers, to enable the customer to move the data seamlessly and control that data across that environment.
Yeah,
so that's really where we're getting to.
And I guess, in terms of public cloud, this is what Amazon's vision was for public cloud, making it really easy for the consumer to consume. So that is the statement that everybody's trying to get to, is making cloud computing like utility billing. So you'd like you pay for your gas and your electricity, you'll do exactly the same for your public cloud, and you'll just consume it. You're not really bothered about what goes on in the background or how the connectivity works. You just want it to work. So where there's a gap, it'll be filled with businesses like NetApp, and yeah, you'll get to that point where it's really easy and seamless, the easy to use cloud, I guess.
Yeah, and we've got customers using all of that, and we've also got service providers buying services where it makes sense from those big cloud providers and meshing that in as part of their overall solution. So I think it's going to be more like it almost becomes like products. You choose what products you want, you put that into the mix, and the trick is meshing it all together and making sure that you're not going down siloed routes. That's really key.
And we see that as a service provider at Phoenix. Our business model was built around our own private cloud offerings, or our community cloud offerings, and we thought last year that was definitely the market that we need to be in, and that's what we're talking to our customers about. But what we're finding is the entire landscape's changing. Cloud's gone through the revolution phase. It's now in the evolution phase as businesses become more smart. You're getting a lot of shadow IT now, where developers, or web developers, for example, are bypassing local IT because they're too restrictive, and now they can spin up resource, so they're going straight to public cloud. So again, at Phoenix, we're trying to be more inclusive. So where we think the hybrid cloud model is going to have the biggest growth spurt in this financial year, and we need to adopt that and become the wraparound manageability between a private hosted, a hybrid, or a public cloud offering, giving the customers that control.
Yeah, and it's really for that reason we're not a service provider ourselves. We work with companies like Phoenix to help them build their service to the customer, but the choice is down to the customer. So we're not trying to tie them in. We're giving them all the different choices in terms of the technology, but that infrastructure is an ecosystem, if you like, of partners, of technology partners, of service providers, and giving the customer the option as to how they manage the cloud to the best advantage. And obviously each company has got different needs. There's no one size fits all here. And things change.
You coming back to shadow IT briefly, Mark, you made a nice point before we went on air, talking about some companies saying, no, we don't use the public cloud. And then when you analyse it, you see that they're all using Dropbox, and they've got all sorts of things in the cloud that the IT department didn't even know about. So even if you think you're not using the public cloud, or probably guess again, or probably look again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we're only just scratching the surface with this, really, because as mobility and enterprise social networking come more so into the enterprise space, people want to do things quicker, faster, cheaper, and your traditional IT boundaries are kind of being shot, really, in terms customers are just going and getting what they want. They're bringing their own devices in. With bring your own device. There's bring your own cloud now, like you say, where you've got iCloud and Dropbox and OneDrive for business and OneDrive for personal. So it's becoming a real problem, really, for businesses. I think it keeps a lot of IT managers up at night, especially around the mobility side, because how do you keep control of all that? But there are solutions out there to manage that. You just need to
We are going to have to move on to the research very shortly, but I just want to put one last question to you, Martin,
Yeah.
before we move on to the next section, because in your introduction you mentioned an intriguing phrase, putting data next to the cloud. Can you expand on that point?
Well, this is really the concept where the compute is done in the service provider. So you use the compute there, but the data actually sits next to the cloud. So it's not in the cloud, it's in a separate, secure co-location data center, and there's a low latency link between that data center, and typically these are less than 5 miles from the cloud provider.
So literally is next to.
It's literally next to, and sometimes even in the same building. It's in a cage and it's next to. But the concept there is that for those that are really concerned about security of the data, don't put it in the cloud. Put it next to the cloud. You get the best of both worlds. Then you get all the economics of the compute, and that's really where most of the savings are. So, if you've got to spin up at the end of the year or the quarter, an audit or something like that, use the cloud for that. But use that elasticity. But the data always remains in the data center, completely secure. So that, I think, is a really interesting solution.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks for that. Let's move on to our research now. Recently, Computing asked 120 IT decision makers at large firms about their cloud services, specifically about moving data between providers and environments. Suraj, can you tell us what the research found?
Yeah, sure. So we were just talking right now about the hybrid cloud and how the different public and private cloud platforms do not always talk to each other as perhaps they should. And only 2% of respondents said moving data between public and private clouds is very easy. In fairness, none said it was very difficult, but almost a quarter described the process as quite difficult. So there's definitely room for improvement there. And on the next slide, in another indication of what a bottleneck moving data between services can be, when we ask users of the big public cloud providers to rank the service received, connectivity to other cloud services came bottom of the list, just behind ease of customization and compatibility with other cloud services and storage. Clearly, while speed of provision and setup costs can be hugely advantageous with these providers, they're lacking when it comes to flexibility.
Fantastic, thanks Suraj. I just want to go back to the first slide we saw there, and that's this issue of how easy it is to move data between various clouds, between public and private clouds, because what I see there is that, so we had 22% of respondents rated it as quite difficult. So that's almost a quarter saying it's quite difficult, but then you've got 26% of respondents saying it's not something we've done. So that's half of people who either say it's difficult or we haven't even tried it. Perhaps they haven't tried it because they find it impossible or too tricky. So that seems to me that people are saying, this is something that we're not even trying, or we're seeing it as perhaps so difficult that it's not worth trying. What's your view on that, Martin?
I think for me it says that a lot of those people haven't actually tried it, and it's not something that's high. They've not really considered the data in the way that they should have done. So I think it's going to be interesting to see where the way that pans out. I think as more companies realise that the data is really what this is about, and that ability to be able to move data in and out of the cloud is key. I think that it'll be interesting to answer that question in a year or so's time. I think you'll get quite a different result.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that is the case as well, because whether you like it or not, data is doubling in size every couple of years. We're already into zettabytes and exabytes, and now there's yottabytes. Data just continues to grow and grow and grow, and as IT becomes more intrinsic, both in business and in home lives, people need places to store data, and it'll just continue to grow. And it's inevitable that you're going to need to use these public hyperscalers for the mass cheap storage, for example, for your cold data that you don't really access that very often, but you need to have that available for compliancy and restores and and that kind of stuff. So it's I think I just wanted to pick up on that poll as well. I think the people that said it was neither easy or difficult, my guess is that they'll be moving from, as I said earlier, from one particular vendor to their public cloud offering, and it's in the public cloud vendor's interest to make that as easy as transition as possible. But like you say, what we're getting to now is where customers want choice. They particularly want two public cloud offerings rather than just one, not putting all their eggs in one basket. And this is where service providers such as Phoenix and vendors such as NetApp bring solutions into our portfolios that help customers decide which way they want to go and how they want to do that and how much control they want to give up or retain.
I think if I can quickly jump in, on the private storage that I talked about, data next to the cloud, there if you use some of the co-location providers, they can give you a link to multiple cloud offerings. So they have something where you can just simply switch to another cloud provider, literally by pointing to a different service provider or multiple service providers. The beauty there is the data doesn't move. So the data remains in that co-location data center. Mm-hmm. It just simply points to Azure and Amazon or whoever it is, and you make that switch. So we're seeing customers starting to take advantage of that in terms of cost and also balancing their risk, if you like.
Sure, fantastic. Okay, so coming back to Suraj's second slide there with some of the research, I think what we can see is that hyperscale providers, they're great at fast and cheap provisioning. They're great at that sort of agility, or at least initially, but there's other things they fall down on. But in a sense, is that a bit unfair? Because no one's complained they're a universal panacea and they're all things to all men. So, Martin, I'll put this to you, but how can you best make use of their strengths whilst eliminating the weaknesses?
So I think it is unfair because the price point and the scale of offering is one that you shouldn't possibly expect all of those services and that kind of care and management and specialisation that you would get from someone like Phoenix, who's a service provider. Managed services is in their blood. That's what that sort of company does. So I think the trick, as I mentioned earlier, is to use those wholesale services, those, if you like, undifferentiated services where it makes economic sense. Use it maybe for cold data, where you've got to keep data for tens of years and you're not going to access that data. So there's definitely a part to play. We believe that really it's a mix of different types of service providers at different cost models, and also obviously linked back to the private cloud as well. So it's about that choice, and that's really what we're trying to provide.
Fantastic. And I'll put the next question to you, Mark, because an issue, well, there's two issues that I hear most of all when people talk about the cloud, particularly public cloud. And one is security and compliance and the issues of sort of lack of control and governance, all that kind of thing, which we'll come back to. But the other one is vendor lock-in. That's one of the big things that I hear from end users. That's one thing that puts them off the cloud. So it is an issue. How can we get around it? Kind of $1 million question. Sorry for somebody springing that one on you.
Yeah. I think where we are right now is people are starting to take public cloud seriously, and there are just the big 3 or 4 players in this space. And I think where it is right now, if you've got a Hyper-V virtualization estate, you're going to Microsoft want you to put that in Azure. A VMware estate, they want you to put it in vCloud and various others. I think it's a difficult one to answer because there is still that element of vendor lock-in.
Yes.
But I think, as I said earlier, that all 4 of the big providers are realising that there's a much bigger market to go after if there can be more open and encompassing of the other 3. And I think, as well as those looking at it from that angle, you've also got vendors such as NetApp and various others that are looking at technologies that can bridge that gap for you. So it doesn't really matter what your private estate is and what your public estate is. The piece that sits in the middle does all the intelligence, and it's just storage in the cloud, and it's just storage locally, and all the intelligence is done by the middleman.
Yeah, and actually picking up on that point, we've got some clever software which enables you to go from Hyper-V to Microsoft, and vice versa. Sorry, Hyper-V to VMware, and VMware back to Hyper-V. So it takes away it reduces that lock-in, and it does enable people to use multiple cloud providers.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. I'm just going to jump in here because we have another audience question, which is going to be aimed at you, Martin.
Okay.
So this is coming back to what we talked about, data being next to the cloud. The question is, if the data is by the cloud or next to the cloud, and you can point it to a cloud or to clouds, how does the cloud access the data so end users can actually view it?
So the link is a low latency link between the two. So the compute is working absolutely in unison with the data, just as though it were in the same data center. So no different from a server. It would have storage inside it, traditional laptop server or whatever. So it's the link and the combination is absolutely there. So you're using the power of the cloud to do all the compute. Some of those machines will be virtual machines, probably lots of them, but then the data remains on physical hardware in the co-location data center. So hopefully that answers the question. I don't know, Mark, whether you've got any sort of more technical
I wanted to pick up. I wanted to pick up on the latency element.
Yeah.
That's when I talk to customers at Phoenix. That's an often misconception that people think I can put my workloads in cloud and everything will work brilliantly. So for example, if you've got a web customer, they want to put their web front end in the cloud and have their SQL databases held in our data centers. So they're bound by UK sovereignty laws in terms of where the data sits. But what they don't realise is the latency to make that work is massive. It's not workable. So you either move it all or none at all in that situation, and that's where products like yours come in, where they can still have their SQL, data sat in these appliances and this software in a local data center right next to a cloud, which reduces that latency, which makes that model work. So,
that's a good point. So it saves on, you don't haul the data all the way across the network, so you save that, you save your networking costs, and you're so much quicker in terms of that latency. So latency, sub 4 or 5 milliseconds, that's the kind of latency we're talking about.
And we're not there in terms of public network infrastructure, so we need these kind of products. I mean, maybe one day by 2020, the networks might have caught up, and you will have that low latency element in a cloud, in a hybrid model, but you don't now, and this is why businesses like NetApp are bringing these products in.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks guys. I'm going to move on now to our first poll. So I'm going to close it now. So if you haven't voted, I'm afraid you've missed the boat, but don't worry, there is another one coming up very shortly. So we asked, what type of cloud services are you running? It was multiple choice, and we've got a fairly even spread, or at least the top three are fairly close together. We had about just under 30% of people saying they use private cloud, mostly hosted or on premises. And only just behind that, we had people talking about saying they're using public software as a service, which could be Office 365, Salesforce, Google Docs. No great surprise there. I would expect most firms will be using that in some shape or form. And then just a little bit behind that, we had public infrastructure as a service, like Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, and IBM software. And smaller numbers of people talking about. Actually, this is one thing that surprises me. Hybrid cloud was a much smaller number, about sort of 15% there. So personally, I thought hybrid cloud would be more in general use than that, and public platform as a service quite small as well. We haven't got long on this, but Martin, a quick view. Are you surprised by that? With private cloud being big, public SaaS being big, and public IaaS being quite big, but others quite a bit smaller?
Not entirely, because I think it's in Europe, it's down to the availability of those data centers. So if you're in the States, it's one country, one language, etc., and one set of rules. When it comes to Europe, what's been realised, Amazon have just opened up in Germany, for example, which have got very strict data protection laws. So I think it's slowing that down. There is a lag between us and the US. There are certain countries that are further ahead with this. UK, Germany, some of the Scandinavian countries, but everyone's working at a slightly different pace depending on the availability of some of these services. Because if you haven't got that wholesale service in your country, will you be happy to take that service from another country? Would you be happy if you're in Italy to take your public cloud service from Ireland? Possibly not. So that, I think, that is changing. It's changing day by day. There's more and more of these data centers opening up. Microsoft have put a lot of investment in, IBM with software. We partner with all of those. And also the co-location data centers. People like Equinix, for example, have put a lot of new data centers in place. So I think it's an evolving thing. But I think it's a bit like mobile phones. There was an evolution there. There were certain countries ahead. Networks were a lot to do with it. I think it's the same with cloud.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks for that. We're now going to push straight on with our second poll. So that should be coming up on your screens very shortly. This time we're asking, how easy do you think it would be to get your data out of a public cloud if you want to switch provider. This one isn't multiple choice because that would be frankly madness. The answers are very easy, quite easy, neither easy nor difficult, quite difficult, or even very difficult. So how easy do you think it would be to get your data out of a public cloud if you wanted to switch provider? Some of you may already have tried that and know exactly how difficult or easy it may be. Again, you've got about 10 minutes or so to get onto that. So let's get back to the research now. Suraj, you've got some research, I believe, on the subject of hosting applications in the cloud.
Yeah, so as you can see on your screen there, once again, it was the integration issues that came out as the most problematic. Whilst the hybrid cloud is great in theory, getting platforms that were not designed to talk to each other to do just that can be quite a struggle in practice. Following integration, authentication and security, connectivity to databases and software services, and latency all ranked as difficult areas to tackle.
Okay, so it's this issue of integration. I guess this comes back to what we've been talking about so far today. It's the integration of various clouds, Martin, and certainly our audience cited that as a very as one of the hardest things they come up against. But they also mentioned authentication and security as very difficult areas, and that's something perhaps we haven't come up to enough, particularly this issue of security and this feel of wanting to control data. Is this a fear that's just going to get better as time goes on? Is this something that people are just going to get to grips with just as they get more comfortable with the cloud, as more firms, as you mentioned, dip their toe in the cloud and find out that actually it's not biting them, it's actually fine. They're not losing all their data. Is that an issue that's just going to get better with time, or are firms never going to lose this will to just grasp the data like that?
I think it will get better over time as people understand what the cloud is about. I mean, the cloud doesn't take away that responsibility. It's your responsibility to put in place the applications, make sure they're secure, all of those things. I mean, obviously you can have hosted management, which is really where companies like Phoenix come in, where they'll do that for you. But if you're going to go out to the open market and you're just going to buy public cloud services, which you are kind of negotiating and doing yourself, you still need to. So I think it's about recognizing where the responsibility lies. Putting data in the cloud doesn't mean you take away all of those responsibilities. You've got to treat it as though it's an extension to your data center, essentially. So I think people will start to realize this more, and they will come to a level of understanding which will then enable them to go forward. And I think they'll become more educated in knowing what they can and can't do, and what to expect.
Isn't a lot of it more kind of reliant on the customers as well and what they think, rather than the actual vendors? The actual companies who are going for the cloud themselves.
I think that's a good point, Suresh. I mean, in terms of what type of company are you, what kind of organisation? If you're a government department, for example, you've got a whole different landscape compared with someone in the commercial sector. So I think everyone's got their, we're all learning in this. This is not done yet. The cloud has got an awful long way to go. I mean, I think the last couple of years have seen quite a lot of maturity come in and much more adoption and acceptance. But there's a lot of other places where this is going to go. So, I think everyone will be at different speeds in that respect. But it's a very good point.
Yeah, and I was quite surprised by the poll results, to be honest, because certainly when we talk to customers, the hybrid approach seems to be the favourite adoption method, in terms of, we'll put a little bit in the cloud, but we still want the touchy-feely of our main infrastructure in our data centre, and they like, I guess, the management overhead that we provide. That's kind of one of our USPs for a hybrid model, that we can manage and monitor it for you. And I guess one critical thing that we haven't touched on at all is backups. Backups
restores, really.
Well, yeah. I mean, backup is a major headache for a lot of business.
Headache, yeah.
If you think about it in your personal life, it's like having car insurance. You need it, but you want to get it as cheap as possible because you're never going to need it. But then if you do have an accident, you want the best care and the best cover and the fastest response. And to me, that's exactly what backup is, and it's often taken as a given. And when you look at a lot of the public cloud providers, not many of them offer backup services. They'll take you storage into the cloud, into their offering, but there's no backup service. I mean, I know Azure literally just this week has decided to launch a backup service, a quite basic offering at that, but these are all the things that customers don't necessarily think about the latency, the backups, the sovereignty. A lot of customers are bound by regulatory compliance, so PCI environments can't sit in a public cloud at the moment. They need that private cloud element. So yeah, I think we're waking up to the fact that we've got this huge potential, and it's.
I think that's a really good point, Mark. Yeah. So the backup and recovery is the unsexy bit, if you will. It's the it's the stuff that people have to do. It doesn't generate any business for the bottom line. It's an overhead. It's a pain, to be honest. And I think cloud is perfect for that. But you've got to understand where that data is going to sit, etc. And in fact, we recently acquired a product from another company where it manages all of that. It enables you to point to different clouds. So you can point to an S3 Amazon format, so it doesn't have to be Amazon, any S3 format, or it could be OpenStack, for example. So again, we're giving choices where that data is stored. But if you can take away that task, if you like, but it all comes down to not the backups, because the backups in themselves are only useful until you try and recover. So it's the latency, it's the ability to be able to recover that data. What if you can't get your data back? So I think there's a whole discussion point around that. We could probably do a whole seminar on that one. But,
I'm sure also that there are disaster recovery gurus around the world who think it's very sexy indeed. So I'm sure they disagree with you there.
Yeah, sorry, you guys.
The last thing on the poll I just wanted to bring up was platform as a service. Again, for me, that is the fastest growing type of cloud model that we're seeing the most growth in. So we're getting to the point now where cloud computing and IT in general is becoming commodity, like I says, like gas and electricity. Customers aren't bothered anymore what the underlying infrastructure is, how that's structured together. What they care about is availability and an SLA contract with a service provider. And platform as a service gives you that. You let companies like Phoenix or a public cloud provider do all the infrastructure side of it, and you basically get your Windows server, desktop, etc. that you just install your apps onto. Or even take it to the next level with software as a service, where they're not even bothered about the Windows server anymore. They just want the application, just want Exchange Online or SQL Online or Office 365, etc., etc. So yeah, I was just interested to see that at the bottom of the pile. I'd have thought, and if you look at the industry statistics from the various analysts, that platform as a service is the fastest growing form.
And again, if we asked this poll again in a year's time, we'd see very different results.
I think you would.
We do have to push on. We are beginning to run low on time, but before we do, there is another audience question which I think is a good one. I'm going to throw it at you, Martin, and just see what happens. I think it goes back to something we were discussing earlier. The question is, if processing is happening in the public cloud, how can you tell where the data being processed is held during the processing? It could be anywhere in the world, surely. That's the question.
Well, if the data's in a co-location data center, it's in that data center. It can't be anywhere else. It will be in whatever city or country that is located, so you absolutely know where that data is. The compute could be anywhere. But as a company, as an organisation, you know where your data is. I don't know whether that is there an aspect I've missed on that question, Mark?
I'm wondering if the person was talking about the transactional data, so when it's actually doing the crunching. I guess what I can add to that is that, I think what I found is it's typically not anywhere in the world. It'll be geographically.
It will be.
So, for example, if it's Azure, it's either in Dublin or Amsterdam if you're a European customer, or if you're in Asia Pac, it's an Asia Pac data centre. And they all do that. It's all geographically spread. So, but yeah, in terms of the transactional data, will flow through public cloud, but the data at rest absolutely sits inside in your. But it has to be up there to be crunched, and then it comes back. And a lot of people do that. So data analytics, big data, Hadoop, etc. That's all about using the power of cloud compute. You as an individual or as a business don't have that power to be able to crunch the numbers as fast as a public cloud provider can do. You're talking from something that takes 12, 14 hours to analyse down to a few minutes if you use a public offering to do that. But you still have the data in your data centre, but you just use all compute power in the cloud.
And I think that's a really good point. So if you've got a particular task that you need to do, and it might be just a short one, and it may only take 1 or 2 days, why not do that in a public cloud provider rather than have to build all of that infrastructure yourself, but the data will remain in in a known location, it will be under your control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, that's the whole premise of the cloud model is pay as you go. So you turn on the computer when you need it and you turn it back off. You don't have to make that investment in your own data center, but you still get the storage in your
We are going to have to press on there, guys, because there's a couple of really important questions we still haven't covered, and I really want to hit these before we run out of time. The first one, very quickly, Marcel, I'll put this to you. We talked earlier about the fabric approach, which you likened, I really don't want to steal your thunder, but you likened it to being like air traffic control, which I really liked as an analogy, so I wonder if you could do that now again for us.
Yeah, of course. So for us, the data fabric is an interconnectivity between all those different data points, between different service providers, different vendors. And it really is like air traffic control. I can fly from London to Timbuktu, anywhere in the world. I'm flying on the same set of rules, the same language. There's an interconnectivity there. There's something that enables me to scale. Similar with financial services. I can take a credit card, I can get local currency, I can make transactions, etc. in any country pretty much in the world. So it's applying that kind of principle. It's not something we own. It's our vision that we believe that customers need to get to that, and there's a lot of other people that support that, other vendors in a market, and what we're trying to do is build an ecosystem that is big enough to enable that true scalability, and that's really where we're trying to get to.
Fantastic, thanks Martin. So I want now, we've talked a lot about the technical side of things. Mark, I want to turn to you now very briefly to give us a sort of a case study to paint a picture of a real world example of some of the things we've been talking about today.
We have multiple customers in all different sectors. I guess the one I'd want to pick up on is one of our industrial services businesses. These are a global business, over 18,000 employees across the globe. And their storage and their IT is held within our data centres in the UK, and they're like that. But what they're seeing now is that the infrastructure they invested in 3-4 years ago is saturated, it's full, it's coming up for support renewals. And they're really struggling to get to grips with their data management and where they go next. So as a service provider, we're able to offer them now the flexibility of a little bit of public cloud storage, a bit of our own private storage. So we offer a storage as a service platform, which is obviously in our UK data centres. And then we can also sell the customer his own smaller SAN for his mission critical side of his business, such as SAP. On a pay-as-you-grow model, so it's changing from a traditional capex purchase spread over 3 or 5 year contract with Phoenix to a more OPEX-based, on-demand, as-you-grow type model. So the customer really likes that. It's giving him total flexibility. He knows his storage is just going to grow as he needs it to. And basically he's got choice in terms of where that is, whether it's on his local SAN that's just for him, whether it's on his shared storage model that's in our data centres just for our customers, or whether it's on a public cloud storage platform. It just gives him total flexibility and hopefully he's a happy customer.
Without wanting to put you on the spot too much, one criticism I often hear of the cloud is it's great, it's scalable, it's flexible, all these things, but it's great at scaling and flexing up. It's very, very hard to scale and flex down. You can only get more services. Is that your experience? Is that a complaint you hear from customers ever?
We hear that complaint a lot. I guess it's really easy to answer that. The amount of customers that have reduced their storage footprint with Phoenix is, I can count on one hand. The majority of our customers just grow. And it's up to the customer and it's up to us to manage that growth. So a lot of customers have a lot of rate of change. Things are growing without them knowing about it, and it's up to us to give them the reporting and the tooling to keep that under control. But as with Moore's law with data, it's doubling every 2 years, and that trend will continue. And so we can review a storage footprint with a customer. In fact, I did that last week with one particular customer where we sat down and looked at their storage and how long we were retaining their backups for and where they were. And we've managed to come up with a new model for them, but 99.9% of customers just experience growth. I guess the only ones that would want to reduce capacity are campaign-based customers that are seasonal customers. But the few and far between, the majority it's all about growth. So it's our responsibility as a service provider to ensure we manage their growth and make sure that they can grow. Because again, that's been a bugbear of many in previous, that people buy a SAN, it only scales to a certain amount, and then that's it. You need to go get a bigger SAN. So
Yeah, or over provisioning in the old world.
Exactly,
You
yeah.
had to buy more storage than you really needed because you didn't know when you were going to run out, and
Yeah,
it takes away all of that.
exactly, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you all for your final thoughts very shortly, so get preparing those, bit of advance warning for you there. Before we do, we're just going to quickly close the final poll of the day. We asked how easy do you think it would be to get your data out of a public cloud if you wanted to switch provider? And well, this one's much less spread than the last one. So we have nearly 55% of the audience saying quite difficult. They reckon it'd be quite difficult to get their data out of a public cloud if they wanted to switch provider. Behind that, 20% reckoned neither easy nor difficult. And we had 12.5% of people being very optimistic there. Well done you, saying quite easy. We think it'll be quite easy. And about the same number of people saying very difficult. So on the whole, it seems that I guess it's been one of the messages we've talked about today. It's not a simple thing. It's a complicated task. Okay, I think that's pretty much on track with what we've been discussing so far today. So on to our final thoughts, Martin. If there's one main takeaway, one key takeaway you wanted to give viewers today, what would it be?
For me, it's about putting the customer first. It's enabling them to, giving them choices as to different ways that they can use the cloud to suit what they need as a business today and also in the future, and not to lock them in. It's providing that flexibility, that portability, if you like, that passport of being able to move to different parts of the cloud as and when you wish. That for me is my point.
Fantastic, Mark. Your key takeaway.
My key takeaway is a lot of businesses have got a data problem even if they don't know it. A lot of businesses are drowning in a deluge of data in multiple locations. And businesses such as Phoenix, who I represent, we can help you manage that data and make sure that it's put into the right locations. Basically, making data easy for businesses. Let us deal with the headache, and you get on with developing the business.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys. Well, I'm afraid that is all we have time for. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you also for your questions and your participation in the polls. Always greatly appreciated. Thank you also to the panel, to Martin, Mark and Suraj. We've been talking about data portability. I certainly hope you found it useful, and goodbye.